Hello, you're listening to an interview with Father Mike Schmitz from episode 24 of the Catholic Vote Radio Hour. Like and subscribe to the Catholic Vote Radio Hour on YouTube, iTunes, and Google Play, and follow us at Catholic Vote on Facebook and Twitter. I'm your host, Stephen Harriet. And now I have the honor of sitting down and having a conversation with Father Mike Schmitz. You may know Father Mike Schmitz from his Ascension Presents videos, which you can see oftentimes shared to the umpteenth degree on Facebook and Twitter. Very popular videos, and I don't blame people for sharing them. And in fact, Catholic Vote shares them fairly often because they are excellent. So thank you very much, first of all, for joining us, Father.
No, I'm really grateful that you're having me here.
Well, the reason I'm having you on here is you have a book coming out called Made for Love, Same-Sex Attraction and the Catholic Church. It sounds really worthwhile and important, especially for right now. And if I'm not mistaken, it's pretty much addressed to people who experience same-sex attraction. Am I right?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, I wrote it particularly. Well, I was going to say that this is good since you haven't, actually read it. Then I can say whatever I want about it.
You can misrepresent it.
Exactly. Yeah, I can be like, this is so good. You have no idea. It is so good, and you won't even know. It's that's great. No, but I imagine that, the gist, basically, the Catholic Church is teaching. And so that eminently qualifies us to have the conversation. Yeah, I had primarily written it with a couple of people in mind. One is those who would experience themselves same-sex attraction.
Right.
That kind of sense of like, okay, how do we build a bridge to a community that, right? That can often feel excluded and can often experience a certain us and them feeling, but who people of goodwill, basically. Second group was for people who, someone I love, someone in my family experiences same-sex attraction, and I don't know how to understand this. I don't know how to wrap my mind around my love for them and my love for the Lord. And so just trying to that. And the third group was any person of goodwill who wanted to understand the issues better and then also be able to communicate them themselves. And so I knew that it wasn't going to be necessarily a scholarly kind of work because Ignatius had actually published a compendium of essays that were edited by Dr. Janet Smith and Father Paul Czech. And Father Paul Czech had been the former president of Courage, which is a group in the church that's designed.
You can't go wrong with Janet Smith, and that's really good.
Yeah, and so I saw that in the catalog, the Ignatius catalog. When I was writing, finishing up maybe second manuscript of the book, I thought, what the heck? Why are they having me write this book? And I realized, okay, I get it. I can take some pressure off. This is not meant to be a scholarly thing. Well, hopefully it's intelligent, but it's not meant to be over anyone's head. It is meant to simply be speaking to the minds and the hearts of people who are experiencing this, those who love people experiencing this, and then thirdly, those who just want to understand, what does the church teach, why, and how can I share it?
Right. It is a hot button issue, but it's complicated by the fact that there is now a movement that exists that identifies with, frankly, sexual vice.
Right.
And it's not helpful. I've actually had a couple of great guests on this show to discuss this, one of whom is actually an active homosexual. He lives a homosexual lifestyle, and he was great. His name is Chad Felix Green, and he was very helpful because he said, though I'm a practicing homosexual, I do not want to punish ancient faiths that hold that what I'm doing is sinful. And you should not have to do that to include me in your community. It was an interesting conversation. He's still working through it, and we're all working through it, but it was great to hear that affirmation. Another guest I've had on is Bobby Lopez, who's actually was introduced into the gay lifestyle when he was far too young and lived in not only the homosexual lifestyle, but in the gay movement for a while. And one of the great points he made was he said, oftentimes boys, especially who experience same-sex attraction, are actually just boys who are a little weird and they don't fit a sort of masculine paradigm. And it's extremely important for Christians not to accept the stereotypes of the LGBT movement and say, oh, you're kind of weird, you must be gay.
Yeah.
And then you push them out. It makes them embrace the LGBT thing rather than saying, well, I can be a little bit weird and that's okay. It doesn't mean that I'm, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, and I would say that a lot of what you're saying resonates with some of the things that I've come across and experienced myself when it comes to men and women who experience this. And one of the things I would say is in our culture, I would say the devastation, I don't want to overuse that word or overstate my case, but the devastation that comes along with when we reduce a person's identity to their sexual attraction. And that becomes really devastating ultimately when it comes to you're having a conversation with those two men and you're able to say, here we disagree. And my disagreement doesn't take away from who you are as a person. But we recognize that when you have this kind of, whether it's identity politics or a kind of a tribalism where it's no, this is my identity. This is not just something I experience. This is me. This is who I am. Then all of a sudden, when you disagree or you have a difference of opinion, or you say, well, acting in such and such a way or that way is sinful, then all of a sudden you're saying, okay, what you're saying is that I'm rotten to the core. Like, whoa, wait. No, that's not what we're saying in any way, shape, or form. But when you conflate experience and identity, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And it's a recipe for not understanding each other. And it's a recipe for basically where we're at now, I think, in the discussion.
Yeah, it really bothers me, Father, because actually I feel really bad for people oftentimes who get involved in the LGBT identitarian movement. Because I think to myself, they've been lied to because they've been told, and not to get too scholarly here, but on an ontological level, they've been told that they are gay. And I want to respond somehow and say, try to make you understand, there is no such thing. God made man. We're not, and I like that in your title, made for love. Do you get into that? What do you do with that? Because the gay movement likes to almost say that if you're gay, it's the definition of what you are. And I think to myself, doesn't that reduce a person? What about eternity? What are you then? In eternity, you're man. You're made in the image and likeness of God. How does gay relate to that? Well,
that's an interesting thing that I try to highlight in a chapter in the book. When we do reduce someone's experience to their identity, we do a great injustice to them. And Father John Harvey, who is the founder of Courage, it's a group of Catholic men and women who experience same-sex attraction but strive to live a chaste life according to the teachings of the Scripture and the Church. But Father Harvey, I was in college, maybe, or a seminary when he came and visited, and he gave this talk. And in it, he just pointed out, he gave an example. He said, imagine these two 15-year-old boys, and they're friends, and they're curious. So they go behind, the woodshed or whatever, and they try out cigarettes. Because why? Because they were curious. I don't know, 15, you're just interested. And he says, they walk away. What do? You say, oh, okay, whatever. You're curious. You tried smoking. Okay, moving on. But he said, take those same 15-year-old boys and have them go behind the shed, and they are curious, so they sexually act out with each other. What happens then is our culture says, oh, you guys, you're gay.
Right.
Congratulations, you just found out who you are, or as you said, found out what you are. And he pointed out, we don't do that for anything else.
Wow.
There's no other experience in our lives that we equate with identity of our lives.
Right.
And you think about this, how many times do counselors and therapists, and in my work as a priest, do I have to help people separate, this is what happened to you, or this is what you chose, this is part of your experience but this is who you are.
Right.
There's so many people who think of the devastation of abuse, or the devastation of even just when someone does an evil to another person, and they grow up thinking, what? Well, this is who I am. I'm just someone who's scum. I'm someone who's meant to be abused. And what you have to do as a counselor, as a therapist, or as anyone helping is, okay, I need to help you separate the experience from your identity. Right. And we would all probably be praised and say, no, that's an important experience. And yes, that has shaped how you see yourself, and it's shaped how you present yourself to the world. But that can't be the sum total of who you are. And the same thing is true when it comes to sexual attraction.
Right.
That to be able to say, yeah, that's important. Yeah, absolutely. It does affect how you relate to other people. It does affect how you see yourself. It's important, but it cannot be the thing that defines who you are.
Right.
Or else you're selling yourself way too short.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. That's very important. And I think that a lot of people who are living a homosexual lifestyle now have had some kinds of strange or traumatic experiences during their childhood or during their young adulthood. I think that a lot of the trouble and where our wires get crossed comes from the fact that a lot of Christian men are very stalwart and have come from extremely healthy families and healthy backgrounds where nothing really took them by surprise growing up. And so they look at anything that diverges and they say, I cannot even imagine, cannot relate at all to what you're going through. They say that to a homosexual or about homosexuals. That's just a completely different world. They're a little bit, I don't use it, but the word a lot of people use is homophobic, which is, in other words, they say, I don't know, I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I can't relate. I don't get it. Whereas I think a ton of people who have had homosexual experiences or are homosexual actively now went through an experience that didn't have to shape them. And they found that the only people who could relate were people who had shot the moon, right, and gone the whole way. Isn't that sad? I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that I'll try to communicate, whether it be in a presentation or in the book, one of the premises essentially is as we move forward talking about this issue, well, first of all, I always want to make it really clear that when I'm talking about this quote unquote issue, like that is not an issue. That we're talking about people, and that's really important language to be able to remind people of, is that, okay, so this isn't just me, from a scholarly or theological point of view to say, well, let's examine the thing, and let's talk about it, as much as it is, yes, we're going to examine the thing and talk about it.
Yeah.
But we're also coming at this from a human perspective. And that's actually my experience has been the only reason, not the only reason, but the original reason why I even cared about this was, I remember even at a young age thinking, I think there are some people in my life that this is a part of their experience.
Right.
And then asking the question, well, how would I communicate the church's teaching to them? Like these people that I love, like, wait a second, what would I say?
Right.
And being kind of like in this place of desperation, or in this place of, I need to know and I need to make it really clear. But because of that, it's always been connected to a person. Like this has never been merely a scholarly or abstract concept, as much as it's always been, how can we speak in such a way that talks to people? Right. And then the second thing is what you're saying here is there can be an alienation, that sense of like where we really break down to say, well, let's talk about those folks. And it becomes an us and them situation.
Right.
And one of the things that I found is really helpful, especially with younger people who have a big heart for individuals and big heart for people who are hurting, is to be able to make that clear that when the church speaks about men and women with same-sex attraction, it's not talking about quote unquote them. Because if it's just them and us, then it's not going to be productive. And B, it's not true. Because in the family of God, in the church, it's all us. It's all like, this is the family talking about this. And if you don't believe that, and this is when it comes down to your point earlier, or you don't see that, this is an us issue. Why? Because every single one of us experiences the consequence of the fall.
Right.
And every single one of us experiences a fracture or a breaking or a distortion of the gift of sexuality that God has given to us.
Right.
And so to say like, I can't even imagine this. Well, okay. But there's a lot that maybe a human being does or is attracted to, that you'd be able to say like, oh, I get that though.
Right.
So I can look at my own heart, my own life and say, well, how has my vision of sexuality been broken? How has my heart been distorted when it comes to how I see myself as a sexual being, or I see others as sexual beings? And then I realize all of a sudden, oh, this is not just a, quote unquote gay issue. It's not an issue about them. This is all of us. Yeah. Like every single one of us, it touches.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that leads to this, there are a bunch of factors here. First of all, there's the problem of privately, it's sinful and it harms your soul. But then let's move beyond that. A friend of mine recently came to me and he said, hey, a young person in my life just recently came out as gay. And he did it on Facebook publicly. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what to do. I want to reach out to him and tell him, first of all, I love you, but I'm not sure exactly what to do because his family is all broken up about it because they're Orthodox Catholics. Mm-hmm. And I said, I wish I could talk to that kid, because I would say, hey, it's no big deal. When you're young, it's not surprising. You're a kid. The problem, though, is that you came out as quote unquote gay in public. By doing that, you signed on to a political movement. So what about that factor? There is a political movement that is a top-down, aggressive political movement, the LGBT movement, that actually seeks to punish Orthodox Christians, sometimes even threatens to jail and fine them, and is anti-religious liberty. When a young kid comes out as gay publicly against his parents' wishes, I kind of say, you owe your parents an apology because you've joined a movement that hates your family. So don't do that. Talk to someone privately about it. Go through this. But the movement is a factor. The fact that it's not just a matter of private struggles with sin. What about the politics of it? That's a big deal, right?
Well, that's interesting because I would say that you touch on a number of elements. One being the desire to come out publicly rather than even to come out to one's parents or to one's family members first. One of the things I recognize for men and women who experience same-sex attraction is, especially when they're coming from religious families, how the family responds, it helps most if they're approaching from the perspective of their child or their brother, whoever the person is. What I mean by that is years ago, I remember talking with a mom whose son had come out as gay, and she said, okay, now this makes sense. And like, what do you mean? And she said, she related the story of, remember, there were so many times when I'd sit on the edge of his bed and he'd just be crying, like both in high school and college. And he'd say that nobody loves me. And she would look at him and say, are you kidding me? You're handsome and you're talented and everyone loves you. They love being around you and we love you. And he said, no, but if you really knew me, then you wouldn't love me.
Right.
Take, for example, this young man. for years here is this possible, like whenever being homosexual comes up in church or it gets talked about, even if no one said anything negative, he would always have the sense of, but I know that this is wrong and I don't belong here. Or that would be the temptation. Right. And so when I talk to parents, especially if they come out in the sense of like, I'm going to identify in this way, and like you said, belong to the political party and the cultural movement, sometimes that expression is, like you said, a defiance, not meant to necessarily be against a family that was cruel to me, as much as it is, I've been maybe in some ways punishing myself for this time, feeling like I don't belong, but now I can belong to this movement. Now I can belong to this political party that isn't merely okay with me, but actually celebrates the thing that I've been so ashamed of my whole life.
Right.
And so you realize that, okay, this goes far deeper than just a political statement, far deeper than, why are you endorsing this cultural movement that hates us, your family? They probably wouldn't see it that way immediately, at least. And I'll say my personal experience with some people who did that immediately, came out publicly, and then like really kind of threw themselves wholeheartedly into the movement that in our culture is you said, pro-gay, anti-Christian or anti-Orthodox religions, but then came to a balance, a place of like, okay, I see now what's going on there. And so sensible people, I think, will be able to recognize that they don't actually represent me. And on a deeper level, when a person gets to a place where they realize they don't have to adopt the stance of a victim, then, oh, wait, so I don't have to belong to a cultural movement, a political thing that simply relies upon victimhood as agenda.
Yeah, it reminds me actually of when I was growing up, I was victimized and bullied and so forth. And then I remember having this epiphany at summer camp, and it suddenly occurred to me, I can be a bully too. Like I'm being a bully, because my stance was, I am always the underdog. I'm always the one that's threatened. And so there's no holds barred. I can always fight back.
Yeah, because whenever you act, you are justified.
Right, exactly. And then it suddenly occurred to me, I think I made some boy cry because I was so mean to him. And I said, wait a minute, I'm a jerk. I can actually do this too. I need to be careful now.
And so I think that when it comes to that, you know, what I've been trying to do at least is understand what are the motivations with all the men and women that I've been speaking with in writing the book and my own ministry, as well as just kind of giving talks, is like, what's going on really beneath this? And one of the pieces is something that's so obvious, and yet it's so overlooked. I remember speaking with a young man and his sister about when he came out. He was in his late 20s, and she was pretty much, okay, whatever, you know, I don't even see anything wrong with it anyway, so what do I care? That was her perspective, more or less.
Right.
But that actually gave her some credibility with the next thing she said. She said, have you talked to mom and dad yet? And he's like, well, no, I'm talking to them next. And she said, okay, two things. You know, they're going to love you still, right? And he's like, oh, yeah. And he's like, no, they're going to love you still. But, and she said the second thing, she said, but you have to be ready for them to continue to believe what they believe.
Yeah.
Mom and dad are Catholic, and they're going to continue to believe what they've been believing. And he said, well, no, this is my experience. I'm gay, though. They have to like love me. And she said, okay, if you're going to ask them to accept you for who you're saying, you know, what you're experiencing, who you say you are, then you have to be prepared to respect them for who they are. And it was such a great moment because it was one of those things that doesn't often get said in the course of our discussion, which is asking for respect. Okay, but can you give respect?
Right.
It's not actually out of bounds to ask for that. And basic politeness.
Yeah, basic politeness and basic acceptance. But also, given the aggressiveness of the movement, what I worry about a lot, frankly, some efforts that are being made by Catholics, including your competitor, no, I shouldn't say, including Father James Martin in his book, Building a Bridge. What I worry about is that some of the efforts to reach out to people who experience same-sex attraction go a little too far, and what they end up doing is they abandon people to their own vices and their own sins, and those things can be harmful. I've talked with several LGBT people, and I like to make this distinction. There's a distinction I always make between people who experience same-sex attraction, which is a lot of people, many of whom are very good and honestly seeking to do what's right, and the LGBT movement or LGBT activists. Right. The latter are militant, and there's no common ground. I mean, they're actually an army that seeks to undermine everything I believe in and undermine our culture. But most homosexuals, first of all, with same-sex marriage, I always say, who met a gay person before Obergefell who was longing more than anything else for an hour-long church service followed by a life of monogamy and child-rearing? I mean, that's just not a gay thing. So the movement I see as totally artificial, but also dangerous.
Yeah.
But when it comes to people who experience same-sex attraction and are struggling with it, what are the dangers of it? Why should they abandon their vice? You see what I'm saying? What is the pitch? I don't get it. I mean, because I'm afraid that people like Father James Martin, bless his heart, are actually not going to save these people's souls, which ought to be the goal, right? From the Catholic perspective.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, when it comes down to the proclamation of Jesus in anyone's life, every one of us is tempted to be an idolater, right? To have an idol, to take one thing and make it the absolute thing, the ultimate thing, or maybe a couple things and make them the ultimate things. In the recognition of, but as a Christian, we're called to allow Jesus to be the Lord of all things in our life. And so here I experience this longing for money and power. Okay, so whatever that is, I need to submit that to the Lordship of Christ and say, what does Jesus want me to do with this longing I have for money and power? If I have a broken sexuality that longs to, let's even not even say broken sexuality, I have something in my heart that desires to not be lonely, to give myself. Okay, wonderful. I can make that my idol. That can become my God, my driving force. Or I can say, I surrender that to the Lordship of Jesus and say, okay, God, how do you want me to live this out? Where do you want me to say yes to it? Where do you want me to say no to it? Because that's the thing is, ultimately what it comes down to, at least as Christians, is does Jesus get to be the Lord of everything in my life? Or do I allow this other thing, whatever it is, to be the Lord even of my following Jesus? And what I find is that there's a vocal number of Christians who live out an active homosexual lifestyle who have essentially said the ultimate thing is my sexual attraction.
Right.
Because of that, everything else falls under the umbrella of that. And so even my following of Jesus has to conform to my attraction, not the opposite, which is Christianity. And the Christianity that's existed for 2,000 years is that everything else conforms to following the Lordship of Jesus, not the other way around.
Right.
One of the more deadly kind of things that can happen, devastating things that can happen. So when we set up any good thing or a bad thing as an ultimate thing, and just ultimately then forsake Christ's Lordship. And that's why I'd say that's the pitch would be, if you're a Christian, then what we're dealing with not even immorality. What we're dealing with is idolatry. This is not just simply a sexual issue, even if I say quote unquote simply a sexual issue, but it ultimately comes down to, does Jesus get to be the Lord of my life, or am I the Lord of my life and Jesus gets to come along for the ride when I want him?
Right.
And again, this is why it comes down to not an us and them thing, because every single one of us is tempted to do that in some way or another.
Yeah.
And so when anyone talks about this issue, whether it be Father Martin or anyone, one of the things we always have to remind ourselves and remind each other of is, yes, you are still good. And yes, you are made good. Now, everything you desire is good. And because of that, we have to repent and be converted to Jesus and actually be conformed to him. Yeah. And without that last piece of the message, it's an incomplete message.
Amen.
It can be a good start, but it's still incomplete.
Yeah, it's exactly what it's lost here. And getting back to the title of your book, Made for Love. I mean, I went to, I had a wake up call. I went to the doctor once. She said, how much do you drink? And I said, I drink at least 5 beers a night. Mm-hmm. And this was not good. And she said, that's not okay. You in fact, I think what you need, judging from your physical, you need to not drink at all for about 6 months.
Wow.
And just see what happens. And it was a wake up. This was a Catholic doctor, by the way, and one of the most charitable people ever. But she gave me that message. And that is a kind of love, because it's based in fact. And what I'm afraid of more than anything else is we're not loving people who experience same-sex attraction. And that all gets back to, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
Yes.
But I mean, from a Catholic perspective, what is love? We're not loving these people when we tell them, yeah, go ahead, Stephen, keep drinking 30 beers a week.
Yeah.
That's not love at all. And I'm afraid even that charitable doctor, given her misunderstanding, if I came in and I said, I'm engaged in homosexual activity all the time, and there are medical dangers associated with that, she wouldn't give me the same wake-up call. That's what's happened to our culture. We're not loving them. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if this is epidemic or pandemic in almost all areas, where I found in a culture where nothing is wrong, more and more people are terrified of being judged. That sense of, like, you live, again, working on the college campus and with high schoolers, is I get this all out. Just don't judge me. Don't judge me. This constant refrain of don't judge me. And I'm thinking, A, I don't think I've ever given the impression that I was going to, but B, you are surrounded by a culture that says nothing is wrong. So why would you ever be afraid of being judged when nothing you do is incorrect? So since we're in that place, for anyone who has a moral compass, I think it becomes really difficult to speak truth in any way. We just had our RCIA class coming into the church this Easter, and it was really, really great, but it was on morality. And it was so interesting because I thought, well, this is a piece of cake. I mean, it's very, very clear. I'll just kind of lay it out for them as I've done in the past. I've been teaching RCIA for the last, 16 years. And something unique happened where it was kind of a breakdown of what you're saying kind of makes sense, that morality is objective, but it's coming up against this relativism that I've always simply accepted and I've never questioned. And it's always seemed to be the thing. So it highlighted to me what Christian Smith found. Christian Smith, the sociologist now out of Notre Dame, he wrote the book Lost in Transition. It was about the moral lives of American young adults. And he and his team came to the conclusion after, doing the study or survey across the country that generally speaking, American young adults have neither the categories nor the ability to make moral decisions. Because if we don't speak in moral terms or in objective moral terms, then you don't have the terms, you don't have the categories. But when we fail to do that on a regular basis, you actually lose the ability to apply moral principles to real life situations. And so they found that over 66% of the young adults couldn't think of one moral decision they had to make in the previous 6 weeks. And some of those who did come up with something, what they brought up was not even a moral decision. It was something completely different. And so you think about that and the ramifications that has on any kind of conversation when it starts getting really deep, or when it starts getting like where I might have to correct you or say, it's easy, biologically speaking, wow, your health is like this, therefore you have to stop drinking.
Right.
But when it comes to some of these other issues that there's a lot of debate about, and there's a lot of identityism going on, that I can't tell you to stop doing this because, again, the culture says this is who you are. And secondly, it says there's nothing really wrong.
Right.
And it becomes difficult to be courageous in that kind of situation.
Right. Well, the way to get courageous in that kind of situation and the way to love these people more is to read Father Michael Schmitz's book, Made for Love, Same-Sex Attraction and the Catholic Church. It's with Ignatius Press. It's in stock now. Very readable.
I would say that. Yeah, I think it's readable.
It's light. I'm looking actually at it right now. I'm looking at the Ignatius website. It says it weighs 17 ounces. So it's a light.
Yeah, it's a not the longest book you're ever going to read, but it's also not the shortest. It's not a pamphlet. People have told me that they said, oh, I can hear your voice when I'm reading this. You write the way you talk. And I was like, well, if you like the way I talk, then great.
Nice. Everyone likes the way you talk, Father. Here, yes, actually, so inside joke, I keep calling you to my coworkers Father Don Draper. I'm sure you get that a lot.
I've gotten that before.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Father. I promise, order the book once I get off the phone with you.
No worries.
And I look forward to it. I think it's a very important read. Again, we're talking about Made for Love, Same-Sex Attraction and the Catholic Church. You can order it online from Ignatius Press. And God bless you, Father. Please give us a blessing, and we'll talk to you again soon, I hope.
Absolutely. God bless.
Well, thanks for listening to this interview from episode 24 of the Catholic Vote Radio Hour. Again, you can like and subscribe to the Catholic Vote Radio Hour on YouTube, iTunes, and Google Play, and follow us at Catholic Vote on Facebook and Twitter. I'm your host, Stephen Harriet.
On your mind, oh yeah, baby.